The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
Welcome to Security Weekly. I'm your host, Matt Alderman. We are recording live on day 3 of RSA Conference 2020. We're in Broadcast Alley in Moscone West. And joining me for this interview is a really good friend, Ed Bellis, co-founder, chief technology officer at Kenna Security.
Indeed.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. You know, when I talk about Kenna Security, I remember the early days. Yeah. You were a customer at Qualys way back in the day. Mm-hmm. You were, at Orbitz at the time.
Right.
And 2009, I remember meeting you, and then you went off and started this whole thing that is now Kenna Security. And so it's great to have watched the progress of Kenna over the years. I have a ton of respect for the team, as you know, and what you guys have built. Let's start a little bit. Any updates on Kenna Security first, like you want to share with people? Because I saw you guys did a press release, I think, last week or earlier this week. I can't remember. My weeks kind of merged with RSA Conference. But just tremendous continued growth.
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
What you guys are doing.
Yeah, we put out a press release. I think you're right. I think it was last week. But just talking about the growth, we did over 80% growth again last year. We continue to have a lot of success in the mid and large enterprise. We established a big partnership with VMware, where we're sitting inside of App Defense and providing vulnerability information as well as scoring and prioritization for the vulnerabilities that all reside within App Defense as well. We did some partnerships. Who was the other big one we did? We're working on some things with, I want to say it was Avanti.
Oh, okay.
That we did a little bit with as well. We raised our Series D, as you might know.
Yes, we covered that.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah. So Sorensen Capital came in. Ken Elephant is now on our board. He's been great. We also brought in City Ventures and HSBC, who actually converted from. They started as a customer and then ultimately became an investor in Kenna as well in that last round.
That's great. Now, when we think about medium to large enterprise, kind of your sweet spot, they're still struggling with traditional vulnerability management at the end of the day, right?
They most certainly are.
Right? Look, I've worked for 2 of the big 3. Everybody knows this. There's no secret, right? But this has been a challenge for a long time. 15 plus years of how do you prioritize the right vulnerabilities to drive the right remediation activities in organizations, small, medium to large, right? But when you think about large organizations, 10,000 plus devices, up to millions of devices, the scale of what they have to deal with is massive. What do organizations need to look at, right, to kind of get a better investment on their VM solutions and drive to better prioritization, better actionability out of that data?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. In fact, we did a joint study with Scientia Research recently. And one of the things that we had looked at was their actual remediation capacity, right? All right, how many vulnerabilities can you actually remediate as they're thrown at you? And then we look at that, and we also look at critical vulnerabilities. And in the report section, we were actually defining critical as anything where we know about some sort of weaponized exploit or we're seeing some sort of exploitations in the wild. So the likelihood of something happening goes up. In any given company, the interesting stat was whether they were really small, 100 assets, or they had 1 million assets across the board, it was roughly 1 in 10 they could fix, right?
1 in 10.
1 in 10, so 10%. We measured all the way up to the top performers, the very best of the best, were about 1 in 4, 25%. Nobody could do more than that, no matter the size of the organization, which is really interesting. So if you're going to only fix, at best, 25% of your vulns, you got to be pretty picky and choosy about which ones you're going to do, because those better be the ones that don't end up in some sort of an event.
So I'm curious, capacity, what limits that capacity? Is it just resources, or maybe we don't have the right tooling and automation and workflows to do this more efficiently? Because 10 to 25% is pretty low,
It is.
considering the number of vulnerabilities that a vulnerability scanner will return. And to your point, if I can't really identify the highest priorities, that's scary. But what's the limitations on the capacity? Did you cover that at all?
We did actually in volume 4, which was the most recent volume. We took a lot of the data that we were looking at, just in terms of the outcome metrics, like how much remediation they're actually doing, how quickly they're remediating, things like that. And we combined it with the softer metrics that we didn't previously have access to. So we actually started to survey and talk to all of these customers and saying, okay, what makes up your VM program, right? How are you, do you have patch management solutions in place? Right. Do you do auto patching? Is it mostly manual? Are there multiple teams involved? Who are they that are involved? Do you have SLAs and how aggressive or non-aggressive are those SLAs? All of these things. So, and then we combined that with the actual outcome data to say, okay, these are the things that actually we found have at least some correlation to maybe mattering, versus others that actually in some cases had negative correlation or it made it worse. So to your point, right, having some sort of patch management and solution in place was really big, as you would imagine.
Yes.
I would also tell you that in general, people do things like remediate Windows vulnerabilities a lot better than they do Linux, and certainly a lot better than they do like a Java vulnerability or Apache or Tomcat or any of that.
So third-party software is a big gap.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's because it's harder, right? So some of the things that we actually saw were having an SLA in place made a big difference. Having an aggressive SLA in place didn't matter at all.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
So if you have an SLA that says we're going to patch every critical vulnerability in 48 hours versus we're going to patch all high vulnerabilities in 30, no real correlation.
Not really at all. There was a big jump between not having an SLA at all and having one, and then the difference between being aggressive or not aggressive was very little.
Negligible.
And I think in some ways you think about it, in some cases they're probably overly aggressive, which could hurt them ultimately, because you get into the situations where it's like, I can't do that, right? You can't meet that SLA, and you get frustrated teams who are trying to do patch management and the remediation, and it's like, guys, you're making it unrealistic. And you get back to that age-old problem that we tried to solve when we first came in, which is dumping a 500-page PDF report on somebody's desk and say, here, go fix all this. I can't.
Right,
okay?
exactly. Yeah. So let's talk about prioritization, because I think this is the really interesting thing that Kenna does extremely well compared to everybody else, right? In that if I can only patch 10 to 25% of critical vulnerabilities, and a critical vulnerability not just being a CVSS score above 7 or whatever number you want to place on it. Yep. How do you really drive identifying where the real criticality is to optimize what they can actually work on?
Yeah, absolutely. So under the hood, I mean, what we're looking at is a lot of threat and exploit intelligence that we're collecting across the internet through sensors, through partnerships with managed service providers, SIMs, et cetera. And we're looking at a lot of telemetry about the attacks on those vulnerabilities, right? So, and we're measuring successful attacks, and we're measuring volume and velocity of those as well. Okay. So there's a big difference of whether or not this vulnerability got exploited once last month, or it's getting hit 20,000 times an hour, right? So there's a lot of spraying and pray, as you know, would go across the internet. We also are going to look and say, all right, is there malware that's tied to this? How much of it, and how often, and things like that. But I also want to know about the asset that it affects, right? So where does that sit on your network? How exposed is it? How important is it to you? What business processes are running off that asset? All the metadata about that to say, I want to know not just about likelihood, I need to know about impact as well, right? And then put all that together. So what we personally do is we attach a 0 to 1,000 risk score to every single asset and every single application. But then we're going to combine all of that data and turn it on its head, because what we want to really know is, what do you have to do, right? Yes, this is a list of problems, but give me a list of solutions, and hopefully a short list of solutions. So we take all of that data, turn it on its head, and say, for any given group of assets or applications, and you define how you do that, is here's a prescribed bang for your buck list of things that you can do that's going to reduce that risk the most with the least amount of effort.
And I imagine it's based on the critical vulnerabilities in that group.
That's right.
John Strand talks about this on Enterprise Security Weekly. He said, look, if you're doing an export by asset, you're doing it upside down, right? What you want to know is, what are those critical vulnerabilities, and really export it out the other way based on vulnerabilities, because then when you solve this, it solves all these downstream activities. So you're doing the same thing. Right. Business context is driving the criticality of the asset and the risk score on the asset. Right. But then when you flip it, you're saying, to protect this group of assets, these are the top 2 or 3 things that you can do that minimizes the most risk. Is that really the way to think of it?
That's right. I mean, you can think of it as, what's the most likely event to occur across these group of assets, and what's the impact if that does indeed happen, right? And we want to make sure that the most likely and the biggest impact things are getting eliminated across that group of assets. And by the way, you can have bang for your buck effects in the fact that, it's actually that I have the same vulnerability on 1,000 assets, right? And I can wipe it off all 1,000 assets by pushing out this patch through SCCM as an example, or whatever.
Yeah. Has there been interest in Kenna closing that loop? Because it's interesting, right? If you look at some of your competitors or the traditional vuln management vendors, you're starting to see this interesting patching component start to come into their solutions, right? And again, you've got this really great prioritized data. Are customers looking for Kenna to provide that patching and closing that loop? Because look, when I traveled around the world for Tenable, for example, right? I mean, all customers wanted was a simple closed loop patch management process. If I scanned it and I saw a vulnerability and I knew that there was a patch, can you apply the patch, rescan, and call it a day, right? Are you seeing the same thing from your customer base yet or not?
We do. I think it depends a lot on the tech. Like I said, they're also really, you see our customers, they're managing SCCM and Windows are okay. And then as soon as they get off of Windows, it's like, oh my God, what are we doing here? Right. We do. So we'd like to take that Switzerland approach, not only on the assessment side, but on the patch management side as well. So we're talking to other vendors, some of them here on the show floor, about how could we integrate with you guys. And there's a lot.
I hope you're talking to my buddies at Automod.
We are indeed.
I love
indeed.
Because they're cross-platform.
Yep, absolutely. And one of the things that we also find is there's not only a patching problem or a prioritization problem, but there's a workflow problem across all of that as well, right? So how do you manage it when first I've got to go and get this change approved, and then it's got to go tested in a certain environment, and then you patch there, and then it gets kicked back to a different status, if you will, and it goes through the same approval process again before it makes it into production. How do you tie all of that together? That's key.
It's still a challenge. Where are you with ARM, the application risk management module?
Funny you should ask. We actually are, I believe Dan is going to allow me to say this, but it's called Kenna.AppSec now. So we're changing the name. But
fair enough.
Yep, absolutely. So we have been putting a lot of resources. It's one of our highest amount of both product and engineering resources are going into that AppSec product, right? So we're starting to take on more and work with more of the container assessment folks, right? So both static and dynamic container assessments. It's interesting. One of the things we've really been diving in with our customers and how they're using containers, and it's all over the board.
I know. But ask Paul. Our journey into containers has been interesting ourselves for our own software. So I can imagine what else is out there.
It's crazy, but I would say if you were to, and again, we're little biased or skewed towards the enterprise, so it's a lot of large companies for the most part. You see a lot of early journeys into their container world where they're actually it's almost like a VM replacement for them. And they're very long lived,
and they're very heavy.
They actually they will patch containers, and it's like, wait, I mean, it blows our ops guy's mind. He's like, why are they doing that? Why are they doing that?
Blow that away and throw in another one. Right? They're supposed to be ephemeral, but I guess they're not.
So I would say 80, 20, 70, 30 right now, with most of them right now still being long-lived. But we know that's changing, right? But that affects then how do we manage that within Kenna.AppSec, right? So we got to treat it. Do we need to treat it as more of an ephemeral thing and say, okay, this is the static image of this container, and this is where it's deployed in production? And I care a little bit about that, but you already know about that because you're using Kubernetes or something else to manage that. So you need to be able to fix this and issue a pull request or whatever, and then pull and push that out. But then how do I manage the ones where you're actually, I almost got to treat it just like another network asset, right? Because you're just going to patch it just like you do as if it's a VM or anything else that's out there.
Oh, interesting. Now, are you correlating data across? I think you are, right? Where you can get host vulnerability data, correlate that into some of the application vulnerabilities, and do you use that data across to also help change the risk scoring across those assets?
Yeah,
Okay.
we absolutely do. So what you'll do is customers can kind of build an application portfolio within the product, and you might have stuff that's coming in from container assessments or dynamic or static analysis. We also have SCA integrations, so those guys as well. Bug bounty, whatever it is, and then you can define it and say, and by the way, here's all the infrastructure that's used to serve up this application, and you can combine that all together. We'll give you a risk score for that.
Yeah.
But we're going to break it down as you get to the remediation level, right?
Okay.
So here's your risk. Here's what you often see is like they'll break up. We have something called risk meter groups, which think of it as our asset or application groups within the product. And it's often tied to a team that's responsible for remediation. And as you get into the application world, a lot of that's going to go off to the developers, but you might still have some infrastructure stuff that's going off to ops.
So when you do that flip on its head, it's like, okay, you got 2 application critical vulnerabilities. They'll go to or to dev, and then I got a couple host base that's my Kubernetes or the servers running my Kubernetes. These need to be fixed, and when you do that, the overall risk score for the whole unit goes down.
That's right. And we can basically loosely couple all of that together because it's usually a many-to-many relationship when you're talking about applications and infrastructure.
Yeah.
So and they'll
especially in
the
a container-based world.
Oh yeah.
Especially in a container-based world, and then. How you doing? Where's cloud fit into this? The cloud assets, are they coming in as traditional VM scans if you're running infrastructure as a service? Yeah. But then, I'm curious how like platforms and other services come in the mix. Yeah,
we'll see. We definitely see all the big 3 guys are Tenable, Qualys, Rapid7 are doing assessments out in the cloud.
Yeah.
But we'll also see like Inspect from AWS and things like that. Things like that are coming in as well. We don't really care where they come in from, right? We're going to manage them, and we'll just technically on underneath the hood, right? It's like it's a different asset identifier. It's like an ECA2 identifier or something like that versus so I can still collect and correlate and dedupe and do all the things that we need to do with that.
Yeah.
But we don't care if it's in the cloud or on-prem or wherever it is. Yeah.
Right. When I talk to financial analysts, because a lot of people call me like, what's the difference between Qualys and Tenable and Rapid7 and all this other stuff? And inevitably, there's an interesting conversation about who's looking at vulnerability management holistically. Yeah. I think of the traditional vulnerability management really focused still really heavily on the device vulnerability, host-based vulnerability, where we're seeing a lot of a move to application vulnerabilities in lots of different tools, right? I mean, there's SaaS vendors that are doing static analysis. You have software composition analysis. You have dynamic scanners. You have the container security folks, both at the static and the dynamic layer. And when you think about holistic modern vulnerability management, it is understanding all of these vulnerabilities across all these different asset classes and really understanding how all that comes together. And I think that's where Kenna provides a lot of value over the single point solutions, because now you can bring all that data together and really get some good prioritization. Where is risk across that entire infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we believe that you have to do that. And as you said, everything is moving to the app, whether it's static analysis, dynamic analysis, or SCA or whatever, and even pre-production, but also post-production and coming in through bug bounties and things like that. We're starting to see GitHub get involved in doing things with Dependabot and things like that. So they're coming in from all of these different directions, and you need to be able to have that holistic view to really understand the risk of that application or that group of applications.
That's awesome. Booth number, you're Moscone South.
No, north.
Oh, north. Sorry, you are north. 6140?
You got it.
6140. So if you want to see Kenna Security live in action, go to Moscone North 6140. Ed, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Matt. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Everyone, thank you for watching and listening. We'll see you soon.